Okay, I welcome everyone to the 25th Climate Intervention Virtual Symposium. Our first speaker is Dr. Timofei Sukhodolov from the Physical Meteorological Observatory in Davos. Today, our two speakers, they're both going to talk about solid particles, but from two different point of views. So, Timofei, you start sharing your screen and the chair is yours.
Mm-hmm. Hi, everyone. Today I will be talking about um, solid particle SAI. And I suppose that everyone here is familiar with the concept of solar radiation management and stratospheric aerosol injection. And in my talk, I will be only talking about stratospheric aerosol injections, and I will jump straight to the point without much discussing the necessity of geoengineering science, where the climate change is, and so on. So just researching what we know and what we don't. And the results of my talk have been achieved by collaborative activities with many people. Ilaria is here also in the list. Yeah. So, SAI. The concept is that we need to cool climate, and being inspired by volcanic eruptions, we put something in the stratosphere, like SO2, which then creates sulfate aerosols. Then it will scatter some of the sunlight back to space, and we will have a colder troposphere. But unfortunately, sulfate is also absorptive in the long wave, which leads to the warming of the lower stratosphere and trapping of the long wave energy within the climate system. Besides this, sulfate is also it can provide heterogeneous surfaces for heterogeneous activation of chlorine that can then deplete ozone, which is also not good. We all remember the ozone hole problem and the Montreal Protocol, and we don't want to get to the same issues again with solar geoengineering. But in addition to that, these two things, they do not only stay there in the stratosphere, but then they can affect the dynamics with implications for the surface through stratosphere-tropospheric coupling, which then can affect the tropospheric large-scale circulation and therefore global and regional climate. And therefore, people have started thinking already some time ago, what could be the other potential candidates for SAI? And ideally, what we want from such a particle is that, first of all, it will be efficient in backscattering, that it should not cause additional problems to the ozone layer, that it should not be very absorptive in the long wave, should have a small mass so that the particles can live longer in the stratosphere. That ideally they would be not that efficient in coagulating with each other, because coagulation then can worsen their optical properties, that they should not cause health and biosphere problems, do not affect stratospheric clouds, and probably also the tropospheric clouds. So there's a lot of wishful thinking here, so that there's no such one ideal particle, but maybe there are candidates, and we have done some research on that. And in my talk, I will be mostly focusing on the two properties from this list, being the absorptivity in the long wave and the chemical impact. So why absorptivity and the stratospheric warming is bad? First of all, because it can affect the cooling efficiency of the SEI material. So in this plot, you can see the result from our so-called simulation, where the cooling effect is plotted versus the injection of SO2 and related burden of sulfur in the stratosphere. And this is the blue. And star is the burden, and circle is the injection. And then if why models are good, we can switch on and off different processes. So what we did here, we just switched off the long wave absorptivity of sulfate, and we got this red circles. And what we found that yes, the warming it allows to increase the lifetime of sulfate aerosols in the stratosphere because warming provides you self-lofting. So therefore, you see that the stars for the respective injection, they are large. They are smaller here, with respect to the x-axis, but the cooling efficiency substantially goes down. So where these red ones are located with respect to the y-axis. There are like three explanations for that. So first of all is the trapping of the long wave radiation in the system. So we don't allow it escaping into space. So it stays in the atmosphere. Second, when we increase the burden, we also drive further coagulation, and the particle size distribution can shift to less efficient effective radius in terms of scattering. And third is the warming can also affect the transport of water vapor from troposphere to the stratosphere. And in the stratosphere, water vapor acts as a greenhouse gas and also traps some of the long wave. And here you can see the water vapor increase in several simulations. So SSP2, SSP5, and G6, so which is then geoengineering through sulfate with absorption. And then you see how substantially higher it goes, and that it is much larger than what we would expect from the climate change itself. And then if we switch off this absorptivity, this is G6 no long wave, it drops down to the levels of SSP2. Further, like the previous analysis of what we can achieve with SAI, showed that there could be still many regional side effects, like that's what we have here in our so-called model in the G6 sulfur experiment by the end of the century. So this is climate we want to have, beam SSP2, minus climate we can get with SAI using sulfur in the tropical injections. And that's how the rest of the model looks. So it's a multi-model mean from GeoMean from G6. And you can see that our model quite nicely agrees with the multi-model mean. We have this warming belt, the residual warming of Siberia and the Arctic, the Canada and US. So many patterns are in pretty well agreement. And then if we switch off the long wave absorptivity, many of these side effects of these anomalies are gone. And same for the pressure. So this is the pressure anomaly under G6 sulfur with absorptive sulfate and without absorption. Many of the effects are gone. And here what you see is this big anomalies in the mid and high latitudes, which are because of the shift of the mid-latitude jets, which then are responsible for the changes in circulation. So in the annular circulation modes like south annular mode and Arctic oscillation, which then are responsible for many of the anomalies we see here in the middle plot. So further, another application of stratospheric heating is ozone. So here you see the ozone side effects in the experiment with SAI with absorptive sulfate. And many of the things, they're actually caused by warming, because by putting the warming here, we change the stratospheric circulation quite a lot. We will speed up the deep branch of the Gruber-Dobson circulation, slow down the shallow branch. The vortices will strengthen and prevent mixing. And if in our experiment without stratospheric warming, it would look like this. So in this case, it's only chemical impacts of SAI with sulfate. And you see that the picture is now much more homogeneous. And basically, it could be explained by the heterogeneous impacts of sulfate aerosols being the nitrogen deactivation through NO5 hydrolysis and chlorine activation in the lower stratosphere. And this was done with one model, but now we also have results from several more models from the CCMI experiment, also focusing on the future potential SAI impacts. And here we have now the three models doing the same. So on the left, again, the full effect, dynamics plus chemistry together. And on the right, it's only chemistry. And it's, as you can see, that the qualitative agreement with our previous result is quite good. Further, okay, but all of this was done with the SAI being mostly considering the injections in the tropics. And there have been some papers showing that if you play with the injection location, you can substantially reduce the stress for the Brewer-Dobson circulation and therefore for ozone and even for the strut-trop coupling. It's good, but and also we know that CFCs will be reducing in the future, so the importance of heterogeneous chemistry will also go down. And we recently did a small student project aiming at the question, what if there will be additional halogen sources in the future? And such sources could be emissions from rockets, because some of the rocket boosters, they used this solid fuel, which can lead to the co-injection of chlorine. And also from history, we know, and like from satellite observations, we know that some volcanic eruptions can also co-release halogens. And we did a quick experiment with our model where we first estimated the impacts from chlorine from rockets, assuming the increase of rocket activity in the future, considering where the industry goes now, and also adding the co-injection of halogens to the Pinatubo eruption of 1991. Using some historical analogs from where we can estimate how much HCl can be co-injected. We can see that chlorine is bad for ozone. In case of rockets, the effect is mostly in the upper stratosphere. That's where the chlorine is the most effective in depleting ozone. And with volcano, we have then asymmetry in the effect. So in the south, it was substantial depletion. In the north, it was increase. That is mostly because of the dynamical response of the northern vortex to the Pinatubo, and also that basically under these conditions, which was 2060s, the NO5 hydrolysis effects already dominate in the northern hemisphere over the activation of chlorine. But then if we do the same, but under SAI conditions, we will get this. So here now we repeated the same experiment, but over the SAI with 5 megatons of sulfur, which is usually what you need for cooling the climate by 1 Kelvin. And what we found compared to the previous, you can see that we now have more ozone depletion in the lower stratosphere for the case of rockets. And then in case of volcanoes, it also further worsens the response of the ozone layer, even switching the sign in the northern hemisphere. So the result is pretty expected. So basically, when we have halogens and heterogeneous surfaces, if we increase one or another, both of that is bad for ozone. And then when we have both, it can amplify, they will basically amplify each other's negative effect on ozone. So, and there have been candidates proposed in the past what can be used for SAI instead of sulfur. And but all of that work was done like with radiative transfer models, with 1D models, and so on. And in our collaborative community, at some point we decided that let's do it in the full 3D with like whole microphysical complexity. And Sandro Vationit, he then was responsible for developing the solid particle microphysical scheme within the Sokol model. And basically, he introduced microphysical interactions being like coagulational growth, related sedimentation as a function of size, that now all these particles can be advected, and then realistic removal of the particles in the troposphere through dry and wet deposition. And then in his 2024 paper, we reviewed also quite a wide list of potential candidates like titania and diamond and calcite compared to SO2, and analyzed different side effects, trying to come up with a shorter list of potential candidates. And here you can see the stratospheric warming normalized by radiative forcing. And based on these studies, basically, we proposed that alumina, calcite, and diamond, they would be the least absorbing and the least kind of stressful for the stratosphere. But what was also important finding there is that all this detailed microphysical treatment is important because it can largely affect the scattering efficiency of all these materials. There have been several sensitivity tests performed by Sandro, and here, for example, you see how the stratospheric burden and degree of agglomeration being this color, so different colors represent two different size bins, how that changes as a function of particle radius, so how large is the initial monomer that we release into the atmosphere. And you see that the smaller the particle, the stronger is the coagulation. And in this experiment, it was now same particle size, 240 nanometers, but different injection amount. So, and basically you can see that also the more mass you have, the stronger will be coagulation. And then in this plot, you can see this is the normalized backscatter cross section for diamond agglomerates as a function of the size bin, and basically see that given also that we ejected the materials, and so the initial monomers with the radius where there would be the most effective in scattering, all coagulation, all the kind of coagulational growth would lead to the further decrease of their scattering properties. And to support our findings, we then started co-development of the solid particle scheme within the vacuum karma model. And this is the work of Ilaria and Simone Tilmes. So there have been a lot of interaction trying to implement all of that coding also there. And it was important to have at least two models so that all our conclusions about solid particles are not model dependent. And so we set up this solid MIP with the two models, and we focused on these three solid particles, SAI candidates. And like in our previous work, we chose the monomer initial particle radius being at their optimal scattering, having optimal scattering properties. Then we had to also rely on certain assumption, like we switched off all the chemical interactions to focus first on the microphysics. We tried to use the same or similar optical properties for all these materials, and that we injected all our mass in the first bin and not as a certain size distribution, because we simply also don't know what would be the realistic one given all the subgrade processes and the methodology of injection from the aircraft and so on. And so far, we have done something like 10-year simulations, which is enough to look at the microphysics. And it's pretty simple experiments, prescribe sea surface temperatures, time slice of 240 conditions, and then we injected 5 teragrams per year between 30 degrees north and south, which is the GeoMe 0.5 experiment. That's what we get. So that's already nice that, we have roughly similar distribution of aerosols. So the models agrees that all these particles will mostly stay and reside in the lower stratosphere and how they will be distributed around the globe. But then when we look closer, so what is shown here is the burden in vacuum and Sokol for 3 materials as a function of size bins. We found basically different size distributions. And then that these different size distributions also differed for different materials. So if for aluminum and calcite, it looks rather similar. I mean, the bias between the difference between vacuum and Sokol. Then for diamond, it's substantially different. And then also what they looked at vacuum is what part of the AUD then would be coming from different beans. And what they found is that the most of AUD is coming also from basically the monomers, confirming our previous and that all further beans would reduce the total AUD, even though like quite some mass can be located there, the efficiency drops, basically confirming our previous findings on the importance of microphysical interactions. And we tried then to find the reasons for the disagreement, performing several additional sensitivity experiments when we switched off the sedimentation, the coagulation, and together the sedimentation and coagulation. And here you see the results for alumina. So that's kind of the reference case. Then when we switched off sedimentation, the burden goes up because particles stop falling down and being transported as a gas. And when we switch coagulation, the burden stays small. And basically, if like to summarize, we found that again the microphysical interactions and then the implications of that for the size distribution and the sedimentation is that what controls the stratospheric burden. But we could not, with this experiment, explain the differences between the models, suggesting that probably those are coming from something else rather than microphysics. For example, the transport of species, the initial or like the way how we inject materials and so on. So it's still an ongoing work. We also plan then to look at the impacts, the radiative impact, the chemical impacts, and so on. So, and this is still in progress, but the question is also how well do we understand the stratospheric warming and its impacts on the system and how well the models agree there. So here we intercompared our so-called 4G6 simulations with vacuum and with UKSM. So here we have the lower stratospheric warming as a function of SO2 emissions over G6 experiment. And one could say that it's a pretty nice agreement. But then if you will force all these models to use the same settings, the same injections like we did in the recent experiment under ISAMIP, where we simulated Pinatubo, then we have this. So basically what's shown is also tropical temperature changes shown in color as a function of time after Pinatubo, so June 1991. And in 7 models and reanalysis. And in the with the contours, what is plotted is the SO4 concentration, so sulfate concentration, also from the satellites for this plot and for the models. So what you can see that the models are very different, both in terms of how does the shape of the aerosol plume evolution looks, and what is the related response of the temperature. And then in the same study, when we looked closer at the evolution of the plume, so what is plotted here is the like sulfate aerosol concentration in the stratosphere as a function of pressure and latitude every 2 months after the Pinatubo eruption. We have something like this. So we have like initial here aerosol formation. It spreads a little bit vertically by BDC. Then there is like a plume, small plume going to the south. And then through the shallow branch, we have the transport to the north and to the south. And by the end of 1992, it's substantially reduced. And then when we look at the same in our other models, again, can see that they're all over the place. And in some models, there are obvious biases, like for example, in Mirok, it looks like it doesn't have at all the subtropical transport barrier. So once the aerosols are formed in the tropics, they go straight to the northern pole without caring about any transport barriers there. In some other cases, like in Sokol, for example, where's Sokol? Sokol. Here we have a two strong vertical diffusion, which then also defines the further lifetime of the species. So a lot more, I think, has to be done there in understanding and like in improving the intermodal agreement and like stratospheric transport of aerosol particles. But this solid MIP, consisting so far just of 2 models, is all work in progress. But with our model, given that it was, we already had a model version where these particles were active radiatively, and further I will also show you some results about their chemical impact. We also looked at like what it means for the system. And here, what's plotted is the side effects of different materials for 1 Kelvin of, if you want to cool the climate by 1 Kelvin, you see that in case of sulfur, it will be a lot of warming, and then for aluminum, calcite, and diamond, that one, like the warming reduces. Then stratospheric polar vortices, so the zonal wind responds to that very strongly, and stratospheric water vapor, what I already talked about. And then also we found and showed in this paper that the particles will also differ quite substantially in their resulting cooling efficiency, meaning like how much you need to inject to cool down by like a certain degrees. And this then depends on many things. So it's like how heavy are the particles, how much do they coagulate, if they're self-lofting or not. We found that like the diamond would be much more efficient than like other particles like alumina and calcite and sulfate. All right. So then we also looked at other side effects.
Timofei,
Yeah, have to
can I
finish.
stop you because it's 9:30?
Oh, really? Okay.
But if this is your last slide, you can go ahead.
This is my last slide. Okay,
Okay.
my last slide. Okay, give me, it's not my last slide, but give me maybe 1 more minute just to quickly scroll
Okay.
through. So where we are now, and then we will go to questions. So then you can go and ask us more details. So given that we have a model version where we can look not only at what happens in the stratosphere, but what would be implications for climate, we're now also trying to publish and do research on, like, for example, the implications for global hydrological cycle, where we look at monsoons, hydrological sensitivity and other things. And here you can see that again, the less absorptive materials produce less stress for the global hydrological system compared to sulfur. We looked at Hadley cell, annular circulation modes being SM and NAO, monsoons, tropospheric photolysis, and also we looked at chemistry. And chemistry is very uncertain. That's why in many of our experiments we kept that being switched off. But in this seminar series, Sandra already talked about chemistry quite a lot, so I will not cover that again. And basically, this part is limited by the very few lab data being available for kind of to constrain the huge uncertainty. And here's my summary slide. Basically, what we need and for further development of the solid particle SAI direction is collaboration between different atmospheric physical directions, being the global modeling, and that's what we were doing mostly now. Then the lab groups who can then update us with the physical, chemical, and optical properties of SAI candidates, plus also like coagulation efficiency, surface chemistry, and so on. Then also the near field modeling. So how the particles will interact when they're just released and they're there in large concentrations, and what would be therefore the resulting size distribution when we arrive to the scale of the global model grid box. And ultimately, what does it all mean for the climate on the global and regional level, and whether we can do with this solid particle or like SAI particle candidates better than what has been done with sulfur. And here I listed main uncertainties, how I see them, and how they can be improved. And yeah, that's it from my side. Please ask a question.
Thank you, Timofei. This was a very complete overview on sulfate and non-sulfate particles for SAI. And thank you for giving also an overview of the behaviors of the model that we usually used for assessing SAI and volcanic eruption impact. We don't have time for questions, but you can type questions in the chat, or probably you're gonna meet us at the Gordon conference, so you can ask more questions there in person. So I would introduce our next speaker, Professor Brad Marston. I'm really happy to have you here since he's going to present on a different topic from our usual meeting. Also, professor from Brown University. So you can start sharing your screen.
Okay.
And the chair is yours.
Great, thank you. Is that coming through okay? Great, okay. Yeah, thank you very much for this invitation to speak here. This is a rather different topic. I want to discuss the combination of an approach to atmospheric carbon dioxide removal with surface albedo modification. And this is some work that I've done with Dan Ibarra, my colleague here at Brown. He's a geochemist, and I'm a climate physicist. So the impetus for this is that I'm involved with the American Physical Society, and a couple of years ago we decided to take a look at different approaches to removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And we ended up writing a report that's kind of a broad overview of this topic. And I was particularly interested in the form of carbon dioxide removal based on applying crushed rock to large surfaces like farmland and to react with the atmospheric carbon dioxide. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. But we also considered other approaches such as direct air capture, making these large machines to capture carbon dioxide with substantial energy input, and other approaches. So we classify these different approaches as cyclic. That would be these direct air capture machines where material is reused with energy input to remove carbon dioxide. And once through, which this enhanced rock weathering is a type, where one is using materials that are out of equilibrium with the atmospheric carbon dioxide, and they undergo exothermic reactions, absorbing the carbon dioxide. But that means that in order to have a dent on the large amounts of carbon dioxide already in the atmosphere, one has to apply very large amounts of material, and that has to be done over very large surfaces. For example, if we want to remove just a gigaton of atmospheric carbon dioxide, and human beings are putting up about 38 gigatons per year of carbon dioxide. So if we just want to remove about a few percent of that, one gigaton, then we're going to, just from stoichiometry, we're going to require a comparable amount of material. So this was for this 1.5 gigatons shown here was for particular material, mineral forsterite, which is an alkaline material that reacts with carbon dioxide. But more realistically, you would probably need quite a bit more than this, given that not all the reactions would occur, and so there might be some escape of carbon dioxide after the reaction occurred. Now, a lot of attention has been paid to silicate minerals like that olivine, basalt, forsterite. But another class of materials that are of interest are carbonates. And so calcium carbonate in particular, which we just heard a little bit about the previous talk. This is a view of a mountain in Northern California that's made out of limestone mainly. It's called Marble Mountain. And what you're seeing here is snow melting during the summer, and the snow contains some carbonic acid because of the dissolved carbon dioxide in the rainwater. And that carbonic acid has etched the limestone away so that there's sort of these rivulets going down. And in fact, the whole mountain has caves running through it. So there's a chemical reaction. So the carbon dioxide dissolves in rainwater, giving this weak acid, carbonic acid. And then the carbonic acid combines with the calcium carbonate to give two bicarbonate ions plus calcium ions. And it's hoped that in this approach to remove the atmospheric carbon dioxide, these bicarbonate ions will flow into rivers and then eventually go into the ocean and not precipitate back out as calcium carbonate on human timescales. It's hoped that they'll remain in the ionic form for thousands of years, because if they form calcium carbonate again, that just reverses this reaction, would elevate the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and that would end up going back out into the atmosphere. So you can do a very simple demonstration of this effect. There's a nice article that came out recently about a classroom demonstration of the absorption of carbon dioxide with different rocks. So in the bottle on the far left here, we've put some calcium carbonate, some of the limestone that we applied on a field that I'm going to show you in a moment, and filled the upper space of the bottle with carbon dioxide. And then after a pretty short time, like a day, then you can see that carbon dioxide got absorbed. And you can also see this brownish color. That's coming from a chemical binder that was used to make pellets of the limestone for rapid dissolution and ease of handling. And that's going to be something also that we'll talk about. So enhanced rock weathering, just to emphasize again, we take some alkaline minerals and grind them up finely to increase the surface area so that the reaction rate with atmospheric carbon dioxide is occurring on human timescales instead of geologic timescales. And then that's spread over the land. And so why would farmers want to do this? Well, there could be some important co-benefits to this. This can improve the soil pH, add nutrients to the soil. So there is some incentive for doing this. And in fact, farmers, of course, in many places already apply limestone to soil, especially in the tropical areas. So as I was thinking about this, I realized that the amount of carbon dioxide that is being absorbed is pretty small amount. And yet a lot of material is being added to the surface. So I began to wonder if the modification of the albedo of the surface due to this added rock might have an effect. This is something that's been considered in the context of forests. The idea of regrowing forests to absorb carbon dioxide. Here we see some redwood trees growing next to grass, and they're clearly darker. And so in the case of trees, this can cancel out varying amounts of the benefit from the absorbed carbon dioxide. On average, something like 30% of the effect can be canceled out, but it depends, of course, on the trees and the location and so on. This has also been considered in the context of biochar. Biochar is basically just charcoal that's been produced from agricultural waste material that is then added back into the soil. And so that's a way of sequestering carbon in the soil for, it's hoped, a long period of time. But the biochar is quite dark. And this article estimated that, again, there's some cancellation of the effect going on due to the albedo change. Now, in this case, the biochar is typically tilled into the soil, and so that lessens its effect on the albedo, the surface albedo. But it still has, from this estimate, an effect. So if we want to compare the surface albedo effect, the radiative forcing from the surface albedo change to the radiative forcing from the carbon dioxide removal, we can just do a very simple model, very simple calculation to give us a kind of order of magnitude. And so if we have a solar irradiance of G and we're modifying a surface area delta A, where capital A is the area of the whole Earth, then a change in the albedo delta A amounts to something like 0.7 watts per meter squared if we are considering an area of 1,000,000 square kilometers. So a very large surface area. And that is going to, if the albedo increases, then that's going to have a negative forcing on the climate. By contrast, if we look at carbon dioxide removal and we linearize the formula that tells us that the radiative effects of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere depends on the logarithm of the concentration, then the standard estimate is that this is 5.35 watts per meter squared times the ratio, the change in the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration divided by the total amount of carbon dioxide. And so if we remove a gigaton of carbon dioxide, the example that I've been discussing, then that is a very modest radiative forcing of 10 to the minus 3, 1.5 times 10 to the minus 3 watts per meter squared. So if you can see that if we're removing, say, a gigaton over a 1,000,000 square kilometers, which is kind of a typical area for a gigaton of removal, then it doesn't take much change in the albedo to overwhelm the radiative effects. And if the albedo is darkened by, say, using a darker mineral like basalt, then you might cancel out um, some or all of the benefits from removing the carbon dioxide. But on the other hand, one can imagine using lighter materials like limestone or a silicate material called wollastonite to increase the albedo, and then you would get um, both cooling due to the surface albedo increasing. Um, that would be in the short term, and then a long-term cooling from the carbon dioxide removal. And perhaps you would also help the farmers improve their soil. And if we assume a linear model for the removal of the carbon dioxide as these slow reactions occur, then we can see that with just some very simple scenarios, that it takes a while for the radiative forcing from the carbon dioxide removal to catch up with the immediate effects of the surface albedo modification. And we have a little article about that, a preprint if you're interested. So we've been doing an experiment at the University of Rhode Island using some of their agronomy fields and applying this uh, 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 limestone pellets to the soil. They wanted to do this anyway because they wanted to decrease the acidity of the soil, increase the pH. So I bought 3,000 pounds of limestone and applied it to about an acre of farmland and left another acre as a control. And so this is just the limestone being distributed there. This is a very small scale kind of experiment in Brazil. This is done on a very large scale. But in both cases, the limestone is left on the surface instead of being tilled into the soil. So this is also could be nice from an agricultural perspective. No-till agricultural practices are growing in favor because it reduces soil erosion, which is another way in which carbon can be lost from the soil. So, so having these no-till efforts can improve the soil, can reduce erosion, and furthermore, leave the material on the surface where it can have maximal radiative impact. So this our article picked up some attention. New Scientist had a little news article about it last year, and I made a rough estimate of how much cooling you might get if you increase the albedo by 10% on all agricultural land, which of course is not realistic, but just to get a order of magnitude, that might lead to about a degree cooling of surface temperature for a very simple model. Now, very recently, at the EGU meeting earlier this month, this group in Canada reported that looking at the application of different ground rock types to soil, they measured the albedo change, and they found that it would darken the soil for basalt and lighten it with a lighter material, wollastonite. They considered, so the effects were relatively modest, but they were considering, I think, I didn't go to this talk because I only have seen this abstract, probably mixing it into the soil rather than leaving it on the surface. But these numbers are comparable to the sorts of numbers we estimated from just looking at the different albedos of the constituents. So this is a view of the farm soil back in Rhode Island in November. You can see that actually the brownish material of the binder is kind of washed away from some rains and leaving these white limestone granules on the surface. But a month later, most of that limestone has dissolved and entered into the soil. And so you can't really see those white particles anymore. I measured the change in albedo using a sensitive albedometer, which is shown here. It's a Class A albedometer, has two pyranometers, one directed upward, looking at the solar irradiance, and one directed downwards. So it covers a cone that opens up about 170 degrees in each of the two directions. And it enables me to detect fairly small changes in albedo. And there's a data logger that records this data. So I move this around in the field, measuring at some preset locations on both our control plots and on the treated plots, and look at the difference. So this is a view of the fields from space. In the yellow rectangle shows the treated field, and the black one is the control. The Acela Amtrak line is this diagonal line cutting through the picture there. And the campus is down below in the lower right. From space, actually, one can see a slight change in the albedo. So November 14th was before the application, November 27th after, you can see actually that the field has lightened up a little bit due to the addition of this material. And using the Sentinel-2 satellite, a master student working with me has been able to reconstruct the change in the albedo, which is this green line at the bottom. And this shaded region is basically the period where the limestone had been applied and then was slowly dissolving away. And eventually it started snowing, so the albedo difference between the control and the treated field went to zero, and you can see that in the far right. So this was consistent with a couple percent change in the albedo. And we think that we can increase that significantly if we use limestone that doesn't have this brown binder in it. So if we just put in the numbers, so we have about an acre, 0.36 hectares. The change in albedo was about 2%. If we assume that all of that limestone absorbed carbon dioxide, that 3,000 pounds of limestone would absorb about 600 kilograms of carbon dioxide. So putting that into our formulas, we have radiative forcing of about 10 to the minus 12 watts per meter square. It's tiny, of course, because we're just treating a tiny area. So that's the radiative forcing from the absorption of carbon dioxide, but the surface albedo forcing is considerably larger, so a couple orders of magnitude larger. However, we see also that it doesn't persist, unlike the presumed absorption of the carbon dioxide. That change in the atmospheric carbon dioxide should persist for a long period of time, compared to the month or so that the limestone was affecting the albedo of the surface. So conclusions are that this preliminary experiment shows that this kind of surface albedo modification can exceed the forcing due to the removal of carbon dioxide. And we expect that satellite measurements may be able to monitor albedo changes, even though they aren't as sensitive as the ground level albedometer I showed. But there are lots of questions. How does the albedo depend on the time of day, the season, how much soil moisture there is, the soil biogeochemistry, and crops are growing. So right now we have winter rye that's growing. It's covering the soil, so obscuring the effects of any remnant effects from the limestone. But the plants themselves may also be affected by the addition of this limestone. So it'll be interesting to see in measurements that we'll be doing this summer how the plants affect if there's any difference between the treated and the control field. So the plants are lighter than the soil that they are covering. a big question with all of this rock weathering approach is how effective is it really in absorbing carbon dioxide? It's an open system, and trying to do the accounting of this is quite difficult. We're looking at a very small effect with a large background, the amount of carbon already in the soils. So people are trying to figure out how to do that, and there's still a lot of controversy about how effective it is. And so we want to ask, how does the albedo evolve over time? We have some very preliminary measurements, but we want to repeat this experiment now that we've gained some experience doing this and do it more carefully and try to understand better at what time scale does this the radiative forcing from enhanced rock weathering catch up to the surface albedo modification and its radiative impact. So thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Brad. It was a pleasure to have a talk about climate mitigation from a different point of view. Are there any questions? We have time for a few questions.
Looks like there's some questions in the chat for people.
Oh, I see those are for Timofei, but James Weber has a question. Go
Hi,
ahead.
Brad.
Hi.
That's interesting. When you do your calculation of albedo, are you factoring in cloud cover? I just wonder if you could maximize this by picking locations that don't have much cloud, so most of the insolation gets to the surface.
Right. Yeah, very good question. So what we did was we used the average insolation at the field in at the University of Rhode Island, where it's measured every day. There's a weather station there, and so that's taking into account the clouds, but we haven't. We haven't taken into account the clouds the second time as the reflection goes back up. We haven't done a full radiative transfer calculation. So this is just kind of back of the envelope, but that's something that we need to do. And now there is a kind of tension here because this rock weathering usually works best in moist locations, since it relies on the water to dissolve the minerals. And so then, of course, you're going to have more clouds typically there. So if you apply it in a desert, where the radiative impact would be larger, then the rock weathering aspect will be less. So yeah, those are some really good questions.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
Sure.
We had a question from Simone, but I don't see her anymore, so I would move to Walker.
Hi, my name's Walker. I'm a junior scientist at NCAR in Colorado. I was wondering this is really interesting stuff. I was wondering if you had done any modeling work or had plans to do any Earth system modeling work in conjunction with your physical experiments.
Yeah, I think we want to start doing some more sophisticated modeling. I mean, since I'm a physicist, I like to start with the back of the envelope and then go to progressively more complex and richer models in a systematic way. But this radiative impact, doing a proper radiative transfer calculation, but also, thinking about a global climate model, trying to consider surface albedo modification. There doesn't seem to be a lot of literature on this. There's some, but I think more could be done. And then on the geochemistry side, which is really where my colleague is the expert, then there are models of increasing sophistication that can be applied there. So definitely, I think this would be very useful.
Cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one last question from Andrew, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I want to ask. So firstly, are you aware of some of the earlier modelling work that was done about 15 years ago that showed that desert sheeting, which is a similar surface albedo technique applied at scale, caused large changes to the circulation in the atmosphere, and therefore was seen as being a pretty universally bad idea. And the other question I had was about the like the micro modeling and the treatment of the actual application, because there are two components to the effective albedo. There's the reflectivity of the mineral itself, right? Like the bulk mineral.
Yeah.
Then you get an element which is from the structural properties of the mineral that as a result of grinding. And as you add water to the mix in wetter soils like we get in the UK or Ireland or wherever, that's much less important. You can see a really clear visible change in soils between an almost black soil in winter and a sort of mid-brown soil in summer. And obviously it's the same soil, but that is because of wetting causing a difference in color. Have you measured that, and have you got a model for that people can apply to other enhanced rock weathering experiments that shows how your techniques, valuable though they are, can be quantified and applied to real fields where you've got overgrowth and you've got wetting and you've got bioturbation, all these factors that lead to a change in reflectivity over time?
Right. Yeah. No. So I think those are very important questions. And empirically, looking at our field, I've made measurements when the soil was dry and also when it was wet. I could see changes in the albedo due to that. But a much more careful study should be done, and probably that could be done in a laboratory setting instead of out in the field to some extent to learn how the moisture is affecting the albedo in these different situations. And so, yeah, I agree that these are important questions, and we're just beginning this work. I think what we're saying is this is something that we need to pay attention to. But we don't know the full, so we certainly don't know the full ramifications of it. But regarding the first part of your question, I'm not familiar with this work, and if you don't mind sending me a link to it, I would really appreciate it.
Thank you. I want to thank again the speakers. I also want to thank Farzaneh. She's a PhD student at the University of North Carolina. She's always helping me behind the scenes with the technical aspect of this meeting. And I want to remind that we are not going to have a meeting next month. So next one is going to be in July, since most of us are going to be busy at the Gordon Research Conference on Geoengineering in June. So let's see again in 2 months. Let me know if you want to be next speaker, or I'm going to chase you during the Gordon Conference. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.